So maybe you've come to the conclusion that Genesis 1 is figurative, that it is not a literal account of history, or at least you've entertained the idea. But now you're left with a question. What, as a figurative passage, does it mean? How should you understand it, and what lessons should you take from it? In this video, we'll be tackling the first verse, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." There are at least three major interpretations of this verse, plus some minority ones too. Here I'll focus on what I think are the two most compelling views. The second one I'll cover has come to prominence very recently in the scholarship, and you may not be aware of it, so stick around. So the first view I'll cover has been the majority view in the scholarship for at least the past few decades. It is that verse 1 is a summary of the creation account of Genesis 1 verse 1 to Genesis 2 verse 3. Verse 1 as a summary is to be taken literally. God did literally create the heavens and the earth. I think the rest of the chapter explains that creation using figurative language. So verse 1 is saying, "This is what I will be," in figurative language, explaining. One lesson here is that there is one creator God who made everything. He alone is to be worshipped. This may seem simple to us, but it was revolutionary in the ancient world, dominated by cultures that practiced polytheism. As Scott McKnight puts it, all the gods of the ancient Near East are eliminated in the theology of Genesis 1, and one supreme God, Yahweh, is left standing. Another lesson is that there is a beginning to everything. Again, this may not seem like a big insight to us, but in ancient times this was not understood. The lack of a beginning was prominent in ancient Near Eastern thought. As Kenneth Matthews explains, the cosmogonic stories told little about creation itself, but focused on theogony, origins of the gods. The gods of creation were depicted primarily as reordering unruly primeval matter, not creating matter. For example, multiple Egyptian creation accounts had gods emerging from pre-existing materials. Also in the Enuma Elish and other Babylonian and Sumerian creation accounts, the stories begin with the gods just being there. As Alexander Heidel points out, for the Babylonians, matter was eternal. And as Davidson and Turner put it, the opening line of the Bible makes two grand statements. One, there was a beginning. Two, that beginning owes its existence to a singular omnipotent deity identified later in the text as Yahweh, a name rich in meaning, signifying a God who is self-existent, self-defining, and ever-present. Which brings us to another lesson. God was not created within the universe. He exists eternally before the universe and outside of the universe, and is sovereign over creation. This lesson is echoed in Psalm 90, verse 2, which proclaims, "Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting you are God." Also, as we are told in 1 Peter 1, verse 20, he was foreknown before the foundation of the world. The gods of the ancient Near East were different. As Ian Purvan explains, the gods of the ancient Near East are certainly not sovereign over creation. They do not even truly create at all. Rather, they find themselves in a cosmos that has already emerged and whose basic characteristics have already been laid down as the gods themselves are coming into existence. Now, as God exists outside of time, he can see into the past and the future. This has a profound implication for his relationship with believers. He has known and loved each one of us individually since before time began. His love for us is eternal. As Ephesians 1 verse 4 says, he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and blameless before him. How awesome that the creator of the universe loves us with a love that is eternal. I'll make one more point before we turn our attention to the second interpretation. Verse 1 showcases the immense, unfathomable power and glory of God. Indeed, the first sentence itself is really a cry of praise. Now, on to the second interpretation, which has gained a lot of traction in very recent years. That is, that the first verse is just the beginning of one long sentence which takes up the entirety of the first three verses and reads something like this. In the initial period in which God created the heavens and the earth being welter and waste, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and a wind of God was fluttering over the face of the waters, God said, "Be light," and light there was. This interpretation has several things going for it. Grammatical arguments for it can be found in Ben Stanhope's recent book. Also note that this odd sentence structure matches the beginning of the second creation account in Genesis 2. See the NRSV translation. It also matches the beginning sentence of the Enuma Elish. This seems to be the way creation stories were begun in the ancient Near East. Now, obviously, as just the first clause in a long sentence, it is not as pregnant with meaning as in the first interpretation. However, I think we can safely retain the lessons from the first interpretation. We will see, however, as we go on to study verse 2, that ex nihilo creation is not taught in Genesis 1. It doesn't teach against ex nihilo creation either, though. The first verse opens with the material of creation already present, waiting to be shaped. But it doesn't say that God didn't create that material too. It is silent on ex nihilo creation, although we do get creation out of nothing from other passages in the Bible. One thing that verse 1 does, in either translation, is set up the main themes of the chapter. One way of summarizing this was done by Joel Edmund Anderson, who explained Genesis 1 as an account of God, A, bringing order, stability, and purpose to the created order, B, establishing the entire cosmos as his dwelling place, and C, reigning as king.